So here we go. Well, welcome everyone to Performing Grounds, Unsettling Cultural Landscapes. My name is Shona Jansen. I'm one of the new co-conveners of the Theatre and Architecture Working Group, along with Andrew and Dorita, and it's a real privilege and pleasure to be stepping into to this space with all of you. And we worked over the last few weeks on putting together this event. I would like to begin, of course, by acknowledging that where I am here in fourth space at Concordia University is located on unceded indigenous lands. The Ganagahaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, and today it is home to a diverse population of indigenous and other peoples. And we are here today to respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So that's where I'm coming from and where I am situated and located today, and welcoming all of you and our fantastic and fabulous speakers. And I guess I would just, what I'm gonna do is just read the questions that came about when Andrew and Dorita and I were kind of finding a way to curate and find a theme and thinking through what this could be today. So here are the questions. Performing and performance space generally involves an event of taking place, but where, what, and whose place? What does it mean to design and construct performance space in a precarious world pushed to its limit by climate catastrophe, mass migration, and unruly pandemics that threaten established borders and the territories they contain? So before we get going and learn a little bit more about the fabulous artists and thinkers and designers that are with us today, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew very briefly to say something about the working group.
Thanks, Shauna, and thank you everyone for joining us. It's so lovely to see names of people who have been involved with the working group over the years, and a whole lot of new names and faces as well. The Theatre and Architecture Working Group is one of a number of working groups that exists as part of the International Federation for Theatre Research. And we all have our little specialisms and our little communities of scholars and artists. Our particular area of interest is the relationship between theatre, performance, and architecture. So we explore everything that theatre and performance space have been historically, that they are at present and might be in the future. And we also explore the really interesting and fertile relationship between theatre, performance, and architecture. We often meet at an annual conference of the IFTR every year, but we're really keen to do some interim events and to branch out a bit more. And the fact that we're now all communicating digitally so much is offering us new opportunities to do that. And this event's part of that, because we're really interested in opening up a conversation within the group and with others who can come into a relationship with our group about what it is to create cultural venues today. With a focus on the unsettled and unsettling politics of land, ground, and territory. I'll pop a link in the chat in a second to our working group webpage, which we have a little mailing list and a Facebook group. So that's the plug. And we'd love to see you all involved in some of the group's activities in the future as well. Really exciting to be here. So hand back to you, Shauna, and enjoy.
Thanks, Andrew. So I think without further ado, we're gonna launch into these presentations and hear from our speakers. What we'll do is actually open up for discussion at the end of all the presentations. So keep your questions and your thoughts and your reflections and what's resonating for a discussion following all of the presentations, which should take about the next hour and 15 or 20 minutes or so, and we'll come back and open it up to that discussion. So I think without further ado, I will hand it over to Latai. Welcome.
Thank you. I must have missed that I was going first. So my name is Latai Taumoepeau, and I'm joining you from the land of the Gadigal. In so-called Australia, where I was born and where I make live artwork that I identify as favour. Fiva is in my native Tongan language from the island kingdom of Tonga in the global south or Pacific Island nations. And my body-centered practice, Fiva, is the art of organizing and performing social duties related to place, the body, and environment, and they are inseparable. I trained and unlearned dance in multiple institutions of learning, beginning with my village, a suburban community hall, the club, and a university, and I acknowledge them equally. My favour is performing art that centres Tongan philosophies of relational va, space, and da, time, cross pollinating ancient and everyday temporal practice to make visible the impact of climate crisis in the Pacific. Culturally, Tongan people don't have theatres. We traditionally performed rituals, ceremonies, sport, and presentations in open spaces, and these activities mark time and document space with the body. So when I favour, we literally do space, inseparable from time, and when I favour, we do form, inseparable from content. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint.
I can do it if you want to, Latai.
Cool.
Managed to download it. Okay.
Oh, did you? That would be great.
Okay. So
oh, cool.
can everybody see that?
Yes. So this is, yeah, cool. Thank you. This is an image of myself, my very first performance, which is actually on the grounds opposite my grandparents' home, which is the ancestral land called Taumoepeau, and I'm wearing a costume that is made of fresh garlands and flowers that are native to my village, which is Nuku in Tonga, and that's my grandmother sitting behind me, and so her and women from our village made the individual pieces, which were adornments around the neck and also around the waist. Yeah, and next slide, please.
Oh, sorry, let me just see if I can do this. Yes, got it.
So this is the first work of a work that I did in 2015. It was a video work called Repatriate, and it was a dance screen work made for a large exhibition that were collaborators who were choreographers and filmmakers. And you can go to the next slide, Dorita, please. It was commissioned by Carriageworks, and Carriageworks is on the land of the Gadigal, also known as Sydney. Carriageworks was built in 1880 as part of the Everleigh Railway workshops and by the 1900s, several thousand people worked there, building and maintaining locomotive engines and carriages for the expanding rail network. It employed many Aboriginal and migrant workers. In 2007, the site was redeveloped as a cultural precinct, and today Carriageworks is one of the most significant multi-art centres in Australia. So if you go to the next slide, this is the work Repatriate that I made, and I performed it live after I made the dance screen work. It was performed live outside of Carriageworks for a festival called Liveworks, and it's a durational work where I'm inside a tank that was made for a glue commercial, a TV advertisement to advertise their waterproof glue, and I was really lucky to find it because this work is about climate change, which a lot of my works are, and all the works I'm speaking to are about the impact of climate change on the Pacific. And when I perform, I use my body as the primary material, which is then framed by the other materials that I see as collaborating with. And this work was initially made as a dance screen work, but I was invited to perform it, and because I made it at Carriage Works, I could perform this work. So if you click to the next slide, it shows that it was a single channel video installation presented on 5 iPads on one of the black walls of a purpose-built galley-like space. Do you want to click to the next
Yes,
one?
just say next. I'm
There
fine.
we go. The installation was presented on 5 iPads on one of the black walls of a purpose-built galley-like space, 5 meters long and open on both ends, and it housed speakers and a subwoofer for the soundtrack that had layers and textures of recorded hydroponic sounds with samples of the Tongan Met Tupaki, which is an ancient prayer traditionally performed on a coastline by men in preparation for deep sea voyaging. So next on, oh sorry, actually, can you go back? I think I've
Oh,
skipped.
sorry. Hang on. Let me just see if I can go back.
So on the small screens, I'm dancing varied Pacific Island dances from Samoa, Kiribati, Aotearoa, Tonga, and the Cook Islands, which I have learnt in my lifetime, and I'm wearing, and sorry, go back one more please. I'm wearing children's swimming flotations, as flotation devices worn around the wrists and ankles, replacing the usual body adornment of garlands as you saw in the very first image. And as the tank fills with water, the floaties become buoyant, and I struggle to articulate the choreography, and it becomes impossible to sustain the movement, and eventually the tank fills with water and she submerges. So it was a work that was made for the screen, but because of the venue that I made it at enabled was Carriage Works, I was able to perform it once live because it had all of the items needed. So the tank itself was not far from there, as well as the fire hydrants that are used to fill the tank in 90 minutes. So what else do I need to say about that? I think that when it's installed in a gallery, the purpose-built tunnel sits inside an exhibition space on its own, and the audience they stand side by side viewing the small iPads, which are references to postcards and holiday destinations, which most Australians, I think, see the Pacific Islands as that. Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. This work is called Refuge, which was an artist-led project with multiple partners, and it was in Wurundjeri country, which is Melbourne, in an area called North Melbourne, and if you click to the next please, this work is at a North Melbourne Town Hall, which was which is now an art space, an art centre. And one of the things that the staff of Arts House realised one time, because they're a council-owned facility, is that they were required to activate the building as a relief centre. And so this posed the question of what is the role of the artist in an emergency, and we came up with a project that was artist-led, that was a 5-year project that was looking at using the town hall as a space to prepare prepare communities for ongoing disasters related to climate change. So this building inside, if you go to the next slide, is the second year. The first year of refuge, we were exploring floods. The second year were heat waves. The third year, pandemics. Fourth year, displacement, and the fifth year, which was this year, was all disasters in one at the same time. And in this image is of my work, the Human Generator, Urban Heat Island, and it's in the main hall of Arts House, and it's what's taking place here is a 24-hour exercise in preparedness for community, which is led by various artists doing a range of things. So I've set up in the main hall a training circuit, where I've proposed the question for the audience, which is made up of community members, a series of exercises that they follow on a grid just made out of tape, and photocopied instructions that relate to futile exercise, but also ideas of producing clean energy with their own bodies, and they're also being facilitated by state emergency services in how to deal with the urban heat island effect. Next slide. So you can see that the participants are following a series of instructions, and the idea is to generate 90 kilowatts of energy, clean energy, which is what the building is the amount of energy required to run the relief centre for 24 hours. So it's trying to ask the audience to produce that for people who are forced to be in the relief centre. And so there are various exercises where you can get on a bike, as you can see in the very back of that. Maybe I think the next slide shows it, maybe it shows it a bit clearer. There are bicycles there that are attached to little mini freezers that are just made out of polystyrene boxes, and they're operated by the bicycles, and you produce one single ice cube the size of a little canister, the little tea-light canisters. Once they're empty, if you fill it up with water, one of those things will fit on one of our tiny freezers, but it requires people to ride bicycles to freeze that one ice cube, which was then transported to another artist's work who had created a cardboard city that was overheating. And so we found that communities were really willing to participate and generate the things that are required to cool the city down. So again, it's trying to communicate different ways of thinking about climate change and using their own bodies. We didn't really generate enough energy, though it was measured through pedometers, and I think we failed, and so we may have only produced about 20 minutes of clean energy through our futile exercise. Next. This work is also related to, or that previous work, the generator, is also related to this next work, which is called Mass Movement. And Mass Movement was performed this year, and it's a durational work that is looking at what it means to become displaced, and what are the coordinates, what are the ways that we can look at displacement. And so in this particular part of Melbourne, it's that water there is the bay, and it's where the Pacific Ocean enters into Melbourne, into the bay, and then that water, then it's called the Birrarung River, and it becomes the Yarra River, and then it eventually arrives at a freshwater creek in Melbourne City, and leads to a high point, which is called Flagstaff Gardens, which is where they used to announce new arrivals into Melbourne. And so by following the coordinates of salt water through to freshwater and to civic water, I wanted to explore what it might mean to to go from being a saltwater person and become a freshwater person, but also to follow the edge of land and sea and observe the life forms on that edge. And so there was what we did was a pilgrimage, a silent pilgrimage following a coastline. Next slide. And I had to reduce the numbers because it had to be done COVID safe, but it was supposed to be a very large pilgrimage of people walking a silent walk following the coastline. And you can see here that there are different people as well as emergency services. So my collaboration has been with the State Emergency Service and trying to generate new ways to prepare more communities for different ideas around the impacts of climate change. It so happens that on this coastline there is also a refinery, there's a life-saving club where we had stopped and had lunch, and a whole range of things. Next slide.
Latai, I just want to, just keeping a bit of time here.
Okay.
Maybe you can wrap up in
I'll
the next minute or two. That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we eventually arrive in Flagstaff Gardens, where we where I instruct a rhythm that is a complex rhythm to demonstrate how we have to learn things to demonstrate that disasters are not a good time to learn new skills, and that preparedness around very awkward and difficult things. Next slide. So this is my final work. This is a work called The Last Resort that was part of Niran, the Biennale of Sydney in 2020, and it's on Cockatoo Island, which intersects the homelands of the Wallumedegal, Wangal, Camaragal and Gadigal people, and it's known as the Warriama. And in 1839 it was, next slide, sorry, it was a penal establishment, and then an industrial school and reformatory for girls and orphans, and then a training facility for boys, and it's been a big industrial workshop for ship maintenance over the years, and it's one of the venues that the Biennale use for they use for the exhibition. So I made a site-specific work for this. Next slide. Called The Last Resort, and it's a work that I had to ship in. I had to get. It's a work that's looking at islands and the precarious relationships between the natural world and also between all life forms. And so I've worked with my cousin, who I brought in from Tonga, to perform this work of producing, I think maybe we'll just play the video and we can just view it, and I can talk through that at the same time. So we had 40 bins of glass bottles from a bar in the middle of Sydney, barged onto the island, and we filled all these bags and created a seawall with it, and we crushed all the glass on this site to look like an island, but also to demonstrate the vulnerability of Pacific people who are already impacted by climate change. We sourced everything from the island. The brick shoes are also from Cockatoo Island, and also the mallets. The mallets are made of a hardwood, also sourced from the island. So this work was trying to look at the relationship of glass and sand, and also sea levels rising and the disappearance of islands, as well as the futile labour of many Pacific people or many coastal communities and indigenous people who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting around around climate change and climate justice. And so this performance was about making the artwork, and the residue of the performance became the work that remained at the in the exhibition space. This is my cousin, and we have a very particular relationship. His relationship to me is actually of a mother, and part of the exploration of this work was, and showing the vulnerability of the relationships in the natural world, was to also show the sharp and dangerous loss and damage of the intangible things as well as the tangible things for Pacific people. Maybe I should just leave it there. And
Thank you, Latai.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful, thank you. We'll come back to talking about all the works after all of the presentations. Thank you. So up next is Amanda Yates.
Kia ora. Hi, thanks everyone. Thanks for that fantastic work, Latai. Kia ora mai tātou. E papatua nuku rawa ko rangi nui, he mihi nunui kia korua. E nā mana whenua, he mihi nunui kia koutou. E nā kai whakahaere rawa ko nā kai kōrero, he mihi nunui kia koutou hoki. O tira, he mihi ana te tātou katoa. No nā te rangi wewehe, nā te whakaue, te aitanga maha ki runga whakato kia hau. E riri atu nei nā mihi kia koutou. Kia ora, I'm Amanda. I'm speaking to you today from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in Aotearoa, New Zealand. As is customary, I just acknowledged our whanaunga, our relations and relationships, beginning with our primordial parents, earth and sky, and then addressing the people of the land, indigenous to Tamaki, then the organisers, speakers and audience community, before acknowledging where I whakapapatu, what land I'm from. I'm an architect and I'm leading the curriculum development of a new architecture school focused on indigenous and ecological thinking. And I'm a program leader for some nationally funded urban system change research. So I'm just going to talk briefly today of how we perform ontologies, particularly in an urban context, and then talk about a performative tool for ontological change. So for Indigenous Māori, the ground is always already performative and performing as an agential entity, papatua nuku, geological being of deep time, primordial parent. With Rangi Nui Sky Father, this earth entity is positioned in cosmogonical narratives as the progenitor of life, as of this living planet. Here, all of our more than human whanaunga, or kin, share ancient origins in a kinetic, fulminating earth and galvanic atmosphere. Whakapapa is the ontological reality of kinship to this living earth. It is the thinking of earth as entity, as primordial relation. This is an understanding of life or livingness as inherent, immanent relationality of activated, performative grounds. Earth, sand, gravel, rivers, oceans, atmospheres, mists, rains, winds, all agential beings. This earth-oriented ontology understands ground, rock, sea to be living entities, interlinked with trees, birds, insects, fish, and humans, all as whanaunga, kin, or relations. Mauri is the reality of a connected life assemblage. This is a thinking of life not as individuated, not as animate or inanimate, but rather of life as life field, as enmeshed connection. When this life system is thriving, it's in a state of mauri ora. Here, holistic well-being is a fundamental characteristic of livingness, and a necessary ethic and orientation for living with our more than human whanaunga relatives. Just had a duck landing on the roof as well, so we've got a lot of more than human creatures around here. But this living, dying earth is currently in a state of mauri mate. We're in the red. Key planetary limits are being exceeded. Ecological diversity, the life system of the planet, is being radically eroded. Planetary ecological integrity is being affected by widespread pollution, including atmospheric carbon dioxide from fossil fuels, a major driver of the current climate emergency. At this time of ecological emergency, increasingly, we see the performative effects of a false conceptual model. Western knowledge systems manifested in Industriocene, manufactured by an industrial petro-modernism that separated human and more than human, thinking the earth passive, inert. Our current car-focused river undergrounding, wetland and forest clearing, fossil fuel polluting urban fabric performs petro-colonial power structures and ontologies. But as climates change, waters flood in and heat events drive vast firestorms, we see instead the radical agency, connectivity and power of the more than human. The separation of human and life field is impossible in a living planet. It's a flawed conceptual model. We live as immanent life field within as a living system where life is enmeshed, multiple, connected as a holism. With each breath we take, we become atmosphere. With each exhale, we deliquesce into air. As we eat, we become earth. We can only ever live in exchange with the life field. Mauri ora is this vital life field. And it's also an orienting principle, an invocation to the environmental entities and other beings of this living kin world to be well, and an ethical exhortation to us human beings to practice well. Now, at this time of a sixth mass extinction event, as our more than human kin are being destroyed by a linear industrial culture, now's the time to return our cities to a state of ecological connection. We can choose to change how we live within the life field, how we engage with river entities, with sky and sea assemblages, with urban birds, fish, insects, moss, trees, with mists, with winds, with place kin. Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the foundational treaty between Māori and Crown, contracts for tino rangatiratanga, sovereignty. Te Tiriti obligations should now be registering in the urban fabric of our ecologically integrated cities, in more than human urban landscapes that are biodiverse and generative, of food for humans and other beings, of clean water, of oxygen, of renewable energy. This is a massive and necessary change in how we perform urban cultural geographies, how we enact ontologies of more than human care in living urban grounds. If our cities can become more than human ecologies that perform mauri ora, holistic well-being, this will be a transformative act. It will bring with it radical culture change, an ontological shift that deconstructs industrial linear logics and petrocultures, petro-landscapes, petro-structures. How to activate this change? I lead an urban wellbeing research program focused on system change tools and place-based pilots. We're testing out different ways of trying to activate or scaffold urban system change. One of the tools that we're developing is an urban wellbeing compass. This is a future-focused performative action tool that helps communities, iwi, institutions, councils to visualize a range of actions, focusing on critical system changes, changes in energy systems, changes in land use systems, including building and ecological infrastructures and mobility systems, changes in economic systems, and actions for community wellbeing. The Māori Order compass acts as a navigator, pointing the direction towards holistic urban well-being. Critically, the compass visualises our local urban actions in relation to global effects. If we can change, land the change visualised for urbanism here, we can begin to go from being in the red to being green and improving key registers of global well-being, shown as the blue and green outer rings. Increasing urban ngahere and blue ecosystems can help to improve planetary ecological diversity and ecosystem well-being, shown in the outermost ring. Shifting to a circular eco-economy with biodegradable materials can begin to reduce pollution and return ecological integrity seen in that second ring. Shifting to an urban net zero carbon energy system for built infrastructure and transport can contribute to the process of rebalancing local global temperatures and water cycles. Making these changes in a just way, in a way that enhances social, cultural, and ecological connection, can improve human well-being, visualised in the innermost ring. We're now working with communities to co-create these place-based compasses. Te Tātou o Aotearoa, a Māori kin group linked with Rotorua Council, has been our first co-creation partner. We're just finalising a housing and neighbourhood wellbeing compass as a tool that helps them to land their Māori Order or wellbeing focused 2050 Te Arawa vision. The Māori Order compass is a tool that aims to stage urban performances of ecological connection through co-creative, collaborative hui or community meetings. These performative events require the engagement of diverse communities. The life system of this living planet is radically interconnected and interdependent, and so must we connect, building networks, seeking appropriate and non-appropriating tiriti or treaty allies as part of an ecologizing or geologizing culture change. This is a time to be acting locally, but also building wider collectives regionally, nationally, and internationally. It's a time for a return to indigenous and place-based ontologies that preceded industrialization and that have resisted petrocolonialism. This is the time to be making space for a performative living earth. So, kia ora mai tātou, thank you. I'll just close out.
Thank you, Amanda. Fantastic.
Thanks. Thank you.
Talking more about that compass. Thank you. Now over to Shannon Foster and Joe Kinniburgh. Welcome, you two.
Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah. Wadeo Galambangurad. We're coming to you today from the Badu mangrove forest on Parramatta, on the river, the Parramatta River, in the Sydney Olympic Park. And I am Shannon Foster. I'm a Dharawaliora woman, a traditional owner of the Sydney region. And we're here to talk to you today about how our culture is expressed and resisted through country. Country being not just earth and not just soil, but also everything you see around you, the sky, the waters, the air, the stones, the land formations, but also the spirit, the language and the people.
Beautiful. I'm Joe Kinniburgh. I'm a Karaku woman whose family have fought British colonisation on 4 different colonies, starting with being enslaved in the islands of Grenada. And now my work is to support Shannon and her elders to embed their knowledges of country into the built environment in Sydney. Okay, I'm just going to share screen.
This is my grandfather, Fred Foster. What can I say? He was an amazing performer. I come from a long line of performers and activists. Yeah, I pay my respects to them as we do this work. I say ni yingi. I ask that, yeah, Tijari Guru Goanamia, which is thank you for remembering our ancestors today. I think it's really important. So we're talking to you today about a song, a methodology, and a practice. This is a song that we have collaborated to create, and it talks about a methodology for connecting to country, but connecting to ancestral knowledges, and to then be able to perform that as a methodology and to be able to then bring that into our work as a practice. And it works around the idea of Nawe, Nalawa, Nara, Wingara, and Banga. And we'll explain to you more about that as we go.
While the city spatially enacts colonisation of country and erasure of local Aboriginality, ontologically embedded within it, within the city, are spectral traces of agency and resistance. And this image is of Shannon's grandfather and great-grandfather as a part of a corroboree for the opening of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, but also with reference to the ancestral stories of that water, of Buambly, the shark, Paradawi, the eel, and of protests of Black Lives Matter and indigenous deaths in custody.
This is a very important photo. On the left-hand side is the 1938 Day of Mourning March, of which my great-grandmother and great-grandfather were incredibly important parts of, and then organising the Sydney contingency. It was one of the first, this is 30 odd years before, 20 odd years before Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks and all of the other civil rights protests around the world. So this is a really huge event in Sydney and Australian history, but world history, but it's been particularly erased and ignored through Australian historical contexts. And we've took the opportunity to create some amazing work around that space, and the hall that still stands there, and the only built environment that has Aboriginal heritage listing now.
This is about performing and re-performing and allowing the ancestors to speak.
And it's about Ele Warawara Namaru Barura, which is to know tomorrow, we must first know yesterday. And all time is possible. We talk about our worlds being important, like the threads that are woven through our dilly bags, our weaving, the bamaru, the grasses, the warawara, the string, and how every single stitch and loop is dependent on the next. So this is one of the younger generations that we are teaching cultural practices to. And I've learned from my ancestors and my elders before me. And so it's an expression of all those times coming together.
Ceremony of culture and of kinship.
Yeah. So. Nawe, now in Nalawa, wait, sit, be, gather, come together.
This is a protest we enacted in Hyde Park in Sydney because the much lauded governor and architect who was responsible for founding a lot of Sydney was also responsible for multiple massacres of Shannon's family and was respectable because of his connections to Caribbean slavery. And so it brought us both together on this place to speak about protocols and things not having been done properly, to come together, to make, to string, to tell stories, but also, to disrespect a little bit potentially. And so, yeah, with the trees, we bore witness and we bear witness.
Yeah,
really.
It's,
I don't know if you can hear this, but if you can't, smoking them out. Smoking is a way of
use smoke to cleanse, to push away the bad spirits and to bring in good spirits. And it's an important way. Singing, making noise, smoking is a way that we push out the forces that try to keep us down.
So this is speaking really specifically to these acts of performing, of coming together and of making together, and the ground upon which they're enacted. Oh, sorry, I want to see that again.
And this is just before, so the police were quite interested in what we were doing, but we were incredibly fortunate that there is fantastic Indigenous leadership within the City of Sydney Council, and that they had created some systemic change that meant that Aboriginal cultural practices could be enacted throughout the LGA without any sort of punishment, and so we were quite safe there. But it was not long after that we would have been in a lot of trouble because they were protecting concrete statues quite seriously just after this.
Other ways of waiting and being, just being and present in the city. This is Shannon's artwork that hangs in the City of Sydney regularly, which speaks to kinship and creating relations and community by bringing the handprints of many Aboriginal people who live in the area, work in the area, together, regardless of what country they're from, onto the to fly in the city.
This is one of the ways that we've always left our mark on country, and to let people know who's here and how we come to be here, and that's by leaving a stenciled handprint. on the sandstone coastlines around Sydney, and what's now known as Sydney. So these are handprints of Aboriginal people across the area, all coming together so that it could be a community work that people would say, there's my handprint there. It's not just an individualistic pursuit of art. These are all of my elders, and this is a circle that we meet with regularly, and we listen to stories, we interpret stories, we particularly listening to the elders' opinions and ways in which they enact story in their life, but the law that comes then with the stories and the rules to live by. So it's an important time for us all to come together.
And understanding that in Shannon's language, the word naba is the same, whether you're speaking about your family, your ancestors, your blood that flows through you, the blood that flows through the creatures of ecology, but it also means the sap that flows through the trees, and that we are all the same thing. This is us listening, learning, talking with the elders, but also listening to country.
This is just right where we are right now, actually. Muru Nangamai, which is a dreaming path. A collaboration that we worked on to create, to embed poetry and the language and the stories of country into this built environment that meanders through the forest. It's an audio as well as an information piece. I think that a beautiful aspect of that was
this is the way that country collects within the work, so that whether it's on the bottom left there, the casuarina leaves and seed pods that break into and fill it and tell the story of country. At the top there, the grey mangrove leaves that are quite oily and salty that leave marks all over the surface, but also that fill the poetry and the language and the waters. And so this idea that sitting enveloped by the skies and the ecologies, that your ancestors' blood is pumping within your skin, but also your connection to all of these aspects of country. They're not separate from you, they're a part of you on the walkway.
Wingara, to dream, to imagine, to understand, to know. And this work is about bringing together the world's oldest ancestral stories with some incredibly cutting edge technology using a 3D robotic arm printer. Kupa, I always get his name wrong, her name wrong.
It's a robot.
Yeah, it's a robot.
This was 3D printing with the earth, with the material of country to create something.
And then marked out positions on the song line that run through the mangrove environment here.
Returning to spirit, melting into the earth, bull ants and white-bellied sea eagles, casuarina and grey mangrove, ephemerally percolated by fugacious water and ceremony. And you can see the work kind of disappearing back into the mud of the mangroves, telling stories of the women. We also recast the city in our work as urban country, which sounds like an oxymoron in English, but
it doesn't matter how much steel or glass or concrete you lay down, the country is always there. It hasn't been erased, and the enduring spirit pushes through no matter what we do here on country. That spirit is still there.
And country doesn't mean landscape. It's not the equivalent of the land. It's the creatures, it's the air, it's the stars, it's the sky, it's the waters, it's everything. And so understanding that when we're designing habitat for wombats and baraga and bandicoots and for plant life as much as it is for people, using materials such as possum skin and things like that in the design. Oops, sorry.
Bunga is to do. We have all these cultural ways of being and doing, and unless you're doing, we're not out there completing the circle of learning and sharing and teaching. And so on that, we think perhaps we should, it's very early in the morning here in Australia. It's actually not that early, but it is for us. And we think we need to wake up. So we have some handy clap sticks. We'd like everyone to join in, put your speakers on, turn your audio on, get yourself off mute. If you've got hands to clap, mouths to click, whatever noise you'd like to make, just follow the beat with us, bang on the table. We do a bit of everything. We bang on our bodies or on the possum skins, whatever you've got there. Let's have a sing along. So we're going to follow the song, which goes, Nawe, Nalawa, Nara, Wingara, Bunga. Bunga! Nawe, Nalawa, Nara, Wingara, Bunga. Bunga! Nawe, Nalawa, Nara, Wingara, Bunga. And as our parting wish, Nigini believe in Nandirata.
I just got a couple.
I've got a few more.
While we were singing, I was supposed to show you some of the work we do building and making into the urban fabric. And I think we have 1 more minute, so I'll just quickly flick through some of these embedding spaces where children learn and enact the act of looking at the stars. This is Gayang Garayira Marawang, the great emu in the sky, in the city of Sydney's Museum of Sydney, the site of.
We messed the place up. It was a gentleman's library, and we brought country in and
performing
made
ceremony.
it an educational place. Ceremony to heal country before we begin work with country. This is a women's space of fresh water and healing and women's law. So we brought all of the female participants of the project together. It's a huge project, massive, with lots of people, and it became very obvious very quickly there is a serious lack of female energy and participation in these levels of development. So, this is a beautiful work that we created for some of our spectacular country on Game, which talks about bringing country in and opening up buildings, opening up spaces to allow people to experience country on the outside.
And also to walk the song lines and to be able to enact culture through the provision of those song lines again that have been missing because of colonisation. Love and care for the ecologies and the plants that can't still survive there necessarily because of the way the land hasn't been managed, but how it could be if we care for it. Caring for Baraga, the bandicoot.
This is Baragula, the sunset. So these are sensational lookouts on the north head of the Sydney area. And this is our interpretation, which is going to be built very soon. And it revolves around the stories of the pelican of Garagang, of Buraga with the bandicoot, of Bara, the shell fish hooks that women use in this area, that Yinima, which is the lookout for high escarpments and the spaces that we perform ceremony, and we see it's not just a visual view landscape, but it's also a signalling landscape.
And remembering that the ground is geologic and ancestral, these rocks are a part of us, a part of country and part of our ancestors, bearing deep time of the rocks and the deep time of the oral histories that go with them, 80,000 years of story. There's the song you all learnt today.
So Nawe is now, Nalawa is to come and sit with me, or to just be. Nara is to listen. Wingara is to think and to dream and to understand, most importantly, and then Bunga is to get out and do it. Nice, that's us.
Thank you.
Niyingi Blimendendirta. May you always see the beauty of the Jadigo. Thank you all.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you.
You all were amazing.
Yeah, nice singing.
So performative. Thanks for that. Okay, and next we have Tanya.
So actually, Tanya and I are switching the order. So
Fabulous.
I'll go first and then Tanya. So then we're going to attempt to do something together. We'll see how that goes.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I'm going to start my stop here. I'm going to try to go on time here. My name is Tiffany Collinge. I'm a Métis architect and artist. Speaking from Edmonton, Alberta. I'm a Scoochie at Wasai again. I'm standing here on Treaty 6 territory, Métis Nation of Alberta. This is the ancestral and traditional territory of the Cree, the Métis, the Dene, the Blackfoot, the Nakota Sioux, and the Saulteaux. And I was born in Calgary. I'm raised in Edmonton, but my Métis family, they come from Fort McMurray, which is just north of here by about 3 hours. And that's via the Red River, just so I can show the ancestral path of our family. So I'm going to share my screen now. Can everyone see that? Okay, great. So my practice is really revolving around quite a few brains. So I do curation with this collective called Aotearoa Contemporary Art Collective. We have an art center here in Edmonton, and actually Tanya, Lukin, Linklater, and Dwayne Linklater, they were our first exhibition. And so that's where Tanya and my relationship started about 5 or 6 years ago. And I also do artwork. I do public art and architecture. I'm a Métis architect, and where there are not very many of us in Canada. And most of this, though, is under the banner of motherhood and family. This is my family. My great-grandmother is the lap that I'm sitting on, and my mother's on my right. and my older brother Jeffrey, and my grandmother Elizabeth on the left. My great grandmother's name is Margaret Paulin, and my mother's name is Brenda Fearon. Most of my work is about these figures in my life, and I'll show you some of that work. So this is Pehanan. This is in the city that I live in now. Where I'm zooming from right now is actually in this location, just so you can see the correlation of where I am in the map in the world. And this is the North Saskatchewan River, which is an abiding force in all of my work. And the Indigenous Art Park is right here. There are 6 artists here, and actually Dwayne Linklater, who I mentioned, referenced, we had a show with the Tsitsi one, his work is here as well. And I think about it all the time, and it's a beautiful work. So you should look up Dwayne Linklater as well, if you have time. This piece I did is called Pehanan, and it's around the waiting place, the gathering spot. This area has been used for time immemorial by Indigenous people. And in fact, during the excavation, they found for the parking lot, when they were making it just north of the site, they found 2 arrowhead points. One was 9,000 years old and one was 4,000 years old. And one of them was the material that I embedded on the top step here. And the second material was, well, that was quartzite that they found. That was the 4,000-year-old point, and the 9,000-year-old point was another material that was from somewhere else, which just talks about how our families or how our relations have traveled this continent for centuries. And that's what this top step is about, is the prehistoric time. And I've embedded stones from the riverbed local to this area, but then also from New Brunswick, where my great grandfather comes from. And this is the fort era here on the second step. And then this is our contemporary time. The fort era started around the 1800s, which is to replicate the forts and the Métis construction. This is the dovetail joint that you'll see on that stair there. Métis, the dovetail-like joint is something that Métis people used to construct cabins and the forts. And then this is the third step. It's corten steel, and this is about our contemporary time, up to my great grandfather to myself. This is about the erasure of our culture. I used a corten steel, and then I integrated her beading pattern. She was a moccasin maker, into the pattern. I kind of came in and out like erasure. And then also about the resiliency of our culture as well. And then this is the fourth step. It's about reflection of ourselves as Indigenous people in our many skin colors, but then also about the environment itself. This is my son, Jasper. I received this commission about 10 days after I gave birth to Jasper. He's my first child. And this is like a few months after it opens, because it just takes so long to do public art in some cases. And this was a really wonderful experience where there's a long engagement with Indigenous artists. And what I loved about this moment is that he ran the course of how I wanted this to be used. I saw someone sort of traversing up and down, and that is, it for me was a reaffirming moment that these things can work. So thank you for sharing that moment with me. This is the pattern. I received a bunch of patterns by my great grandmother. My grandmother gave it to me just after the Fort McMurray fire, which is just this fire that sort of took over the entire town. And we were cleaning up my great uncle's house, and he was storing these patterns for moccasin making. And these are the 3 that I use the most in my work. We use every scrap of paper, every scrap. So on this other side of leather is more drawings, but these are the ones that I use the most. And so this is the red ribbon canopy called Kinniburgh Park. This is in the same city that I live in now. And this is about a ribbon going in and out of the 2-block sidewalk. And this is with dialogue. This is another architecture firm I do not work for, but they brought me on as an artist. And I use the same pattern throughout the canopy, threading in and out again about the resiliency and the culture. I snuck this in because of Joe, when you were showing some of that work. I thought maybe you might like this work. So I wasn't going to present on it, but I thought you might like it. So that's why I put it here. And so then I turned to the corner at the base here because I really wanted to sort of integrate with water, rather than just having a silly downspout separating it. I'm really trying to integrate these things. We're not separate, we're connected. And this floral work is actually about, there's a lot of Indigenous people in this area. There's a lot of displacement. there's a courthouse, there's transitional homes, there's a lot of vagrancy, there's also sex work in this area. But a lot of the people here are, this is the original Chinatown location, that's why this is a red canopy. But this also has, this pattern is reflective of Cree, Métis, Northern beating patterns. And so people will recognize this pattern living in this area. So this pattern is for them so that they feel comfortable. I'm always trying to create spaces that are greater than ourselves and that connect us to each other. So that's sort of the inspiration. This is my daughter, Aurora. I had her during the course of this project, and I always integrate my children through all of my projects. I think like with Tanya and Dwayne's exhibition, I was changing my son's diaper while they were doing their installation work, which then I got in trouble with because you're not supposed to do that in gallery. So there's like this sort of collective piece of family. So this, I got in trouble. This because there's people, you know, some people just don't know how to integrate children into life. So that's why. Yes, exactly. So this, I'm just looking at some people's faces. So this is in Winnipeg, and I'm doing this work in a bus shelter for the Markham station. This is close to where Louis Riel sort of was living and working. They asked for this work to be about Métis land use, and originally I was thinking about script because so a lot of people don't know about Métis history in Canada. They don't know the difference between Métis people and First Nations people. There are some distinctions, and script is one of them. So during the Dominion of Canada started creating the country known as Canada, and to deal with Indigenous people, they created, they started to extinguish our Aboriginal title through treaty, which is predominantly First Nations people who get reserves, for example, and script. And so they dealt with Métis people as individuals to eradicate the Aboriginal title. And this went over several courses of years. And so they started at the Red River, which is in Winnipeg now. Moving west, they surveyed the land. And so when you applied for your script, you can then apply, but if they don't survey the land moving out west, you never actually got the land. And sometimes the course of time it took to go and get the script took just as much money to get it in fact in the first place. So this is one person's script process. You had to also speak and write English, which wasn't common at that time. And you also had to travel great distances. And so this is one person's amount of documents that he had to get in order to get script in the very first place. I suspect that some of this, I can't quite remember, this was a couple of years ago, and I had a baby in the middle of it. I think they were putting this up just like the day after I gave birth. So I was like trying to tile how this worked on the glass. And I think this is a few of their family here. And so what happened is one person would be like the person to get the rest of their family getting script as well. So my great grandfather's script is on here too, which was nice. And I did a call and people participated and sent their scripts to me and all that. And that work was in collaboration with Frank Tuff. He runs the Map Lab, the Métis Archival Project. He's employed by the Manitoba Métis Federation and Métis Nation of Alberta to do this script work. And so when I approached him to do that script work, he said, that's great, you can do that. But actually, if you're going to talk about Métis land use, you need to talk about use and occupancy. How the land was used and how the land was occupied is how you sort of get your designation for land. So on that same site, I used this map. He showed this map to me from our first meeting. And so I created a second work on that same site in this very limited budget. And so I put the paint markings on the ground that show, this is the Red River area that I talked about, sort of Métis homeland territory. This shows how our French and English communities came together. And then this shows where we go for fishing, where we go for hunting, where we go for sugaring from maple sugar. And this is the Red River carts and the trails, because Indigenous people, our characterization is that we travel through the seasons as required. We use the land as the land allows us to. We don't just stay in one location. So these are the markers for each of the forts that were developed. And so I'm trying to look at how to identify the architecture of each of these forts. So these are the upper and lower Fort Garry. This is where Treaty 1 was signed. And then this is where the Provisional Government for Métis General Council was formed. And I'm also looking at different identifiers, like this is the Red River and the Assiniboine River coming together at this fort location. But between these two forts, they have different materials to construct them. So this is the same type of stone, but they are applied differently. And this one also has wood in that construction. So I did, again, the dovetail like joint, which is my obsession. And then I sheared it with a circle. I'm just trying to rethink about how to do these details construction wise. This is the Red River cart. This, what's unique about the Red River cart is it's made all out of wood. And this is what we use for the buffalo hunts or to travel from location to location. But what's interesting about the wheel is that it's cut like a disc. So you can see a little bit of that disc-like behavior in these. So I'm just trying to pick up these architectural details and apply them. Oh, and this I had the least information about here. So this is, again, my reflection about reflecting the environment. But then this lower piece, children can move on their own. It moves. And it's allowed to take on people's fingerprints so that they become a part of the work. I'm just sneaking some architecture because I actually do this stuff too. And this is Métis Crossing. This is a location just an hour and a half northeast of here. And they want to create a cultural gathering hall. And this is a large deck. So this is, they have 688 acres of land. And this used to be original river lot system, just like the Red River that I showed you, or the map that I showed you where they had the river lots. They also had river lots here in Alberta. And so Métis families coalesced around here, and people come to this site as a tourism destination to learn about Métis culture, and also so Métis people can learn more about ourselves as well. There's lots of details about this that make this Métis, which is rare architecture in Canada, but this deck, this deck acts like a vestibule in a way. Oh, it's going too fast, where this actually tempers the environment when you need it to be. So when you go outside and it's wintertime, it's warmer by about a few degrees than outside. And when you come in the in the summertime, it cools, it's cooler on the deck. So it really tempers your transition from inside to outside like a vestibule does. But it also allows for more land-based learning, which is a tenet for Métis and First Nations and Inuit principles. We also took some historic details. There's the dovetail like joint, as you've seen me talk about so many times. So I put it like in the fireplace, for example. They also have we're doing a hotel for them right now, which will open up next month. And they also have a wildlife park that they've just done there now around, they have white buffalo, which is really important to our culture, but they also have a few other types of buffalo and elk and horses. And this is the final project I just wanted to talk about. I'm so sorry, I'm so close. I tried to be under 15 minutes. Sorry, Tanya. This is the Yellowhead Tribal College. They are a political group that have 4 reserves connected to them within Alberta. So this is Alexis Sioux, Sunchild, Ocheese, and there's another reserve that I can't think of, which is so embarrassing. But what they do is they're a political body to help create agency for themselves rather than just always vying independently for funding. So they have like health, they have assets, which is training for education, and then they have education, which is the college itself. We were working with them to get occupation into this building. It's called the Orange Hub. Used to be a college before that. The city took it over when the college moved out and created a new campus structure somewhere else. And this building is 4 stories. It's like a really big interior mall, essentially. And they are occupying 2 floors of this 4-story building. And so they have traditional wayfinding, but what we worked with Jimmy Ocheese, who's the elder there at Yellowhead Tribal College, is around the idea of how to navigate the space. These people are coming often from reserve to the city to learn and to upgrade. And there's just a different way of life on the reserve than there is in the city. And so we thought about, he suggested doing the navigation around Cree syllabics and wayfinding around that. So it's not this traditional way of, it's actually a very difficult building to get around, but rather than resist that, it was about giving the sense of home when they're navigating through the building. So this is the 2 floors that they occupy. And we looked at this. Yellowhead Tribal College has, their logo is the medicine wheel. And then these are how they designate the colors in the medicine wheel. Every community will do it differently. So then he assigned different animals to those directions. So the mooses in the north, the buffaloes in the east, the white mountain goats in the south, and the bears in the west. And this is their library. And we did color coding to help navigate as well. But it was mostly about this Cree syllabic so that when they come, they recognize the language and then they're a part of themselves is in this way here. So this is what you would see in the staircase in level 2 versus level 3. So that's what I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Beautiful, fantastic.
Sorry, Tanya. That was
Oh,
one
that's
over time.
okay, Tiffany. It's always, I mean, it's wonderful to listen to you speak about your practice. As you mentioned, we've had a relationship, since 2015. And of course, when we first met, we just kind of, we just connected so well. And we have this sort of shared space and shared history. So I'm a Lutik or Shukpiak, Hui Shuk from Kodiak Island, Alaska, in southwestern Alaska. I'm from the native villages of Afognak and Port Lions. But I've lived in Nibising and Anishinaabeg territory north of Toronto, about 3.5 hours north of Toronto, for over a decade. And prior to that, I lived in Treaty 6 territory. So I lived in Amiskwaciwaska, Edmonton. And so we have this kind of shared, even though we didn't know each other when I lived in Edmonton years ago, we have this sort of shared set of experiences or connections to the city and to folks like Jim O'Cheese and others. And so that's my introduction of myself, and I'm very mindful of time and so grateful that you've all stayed, and also that I could hear these beautiful presentations by these, as someone said earlier, warrior women from around the world. My goodness. So I'm going to share about indigenous geometries. Hopefully we can leave a little bit of time at the end for Tiffany to kind of, help us to, I'm not speaking extensively about it. I'm speaking about it and then two sort of works that accompany it. But I start by just speaking about some of my larger concerns in my practice. So I speak from times and places that I've never experienced, but I remember, that I hold in my heart, for my Alutiiq or Shulkbiak ancestors. And I wonder what it means to write or make artistic work across time and into time to reach backwards and forwards. Dylan Robinson, who's my doctoral supervisor and a researcher and writer and thinker and artist, asks, what does and what else does writing do? And there's something in the what else writing does, and it's partly the ways in which Indigenous and other folks are caught up in the writing, how they're implicated in the liveness of it, how their books and smaller works exude a feltness, and how their voices insist that these storied experiences matter in the world. And these are the kinds of writing that move me, and they call me, and I respond. So I have a set of citations for this work, and one of them, of course, are poets like Layli Long Soldier, who tells us that real poems do not really require words. And she writes about memory and felt histories, enactments of repair and responsibilities to our peoples. I consider the losses that occurred over time in my homelands, orchestrated through violences at different scales against the Alutiiq or Shulkbiak, and specifically, and then moving outwards. Because I live on Turtle Island, I suggest that we must reckon with these histories, these truths about the past in ways that remember, that speak of, and in relation to history with compassion in an effort for a more just future. And this is partly what I think that writing and art making has the capacity to do. And I'm still working through a process of finding language. As you were each speaking, I was thinking about all of these different connections between different projects that I can't speak to today. But the project that I'm going to speak to is iterative, cumulative, and commissioned at the invitation of curators in the US. And so I'm going to share my screen now. I'm going to speak about a song of felt structure. We're putting ourselves back together again, which was a performance for violin and dance in relation to this work, Indigenous Geometries, which is a collaboration between Tiffany and I for And Other Such Stories, the Chicago Architecture Biennial 2019. My work in the biennial was instigated at the invitation of Sapaki Anjiama, and later I extended this project in a work for camera called This Moment in Endurance to the End Forever as a commission for another exhibition at the Institute for Contemporary Art at Virginia Commonwealth University. So I'm interested in embodied knowledges and how we insist on our indigeneity, even in the face of structures and systems that have actively dismantled our languages, and in some cases, our minds and our relationships to ourselves. I'm interested in repair, the reparative, and how I consider insistence to be embodied, daily, and quotidian, all the work in preparation. Occasionally it becomes visible because of the scale as an accumulation of several smaller acts over time by community and the work of many. These kinds of actions resonate far beyond the original action, echoing in our memories and future memories. And there have been some beautiful examples of that today, really, really phenomenal. But I consider that insistence is taking place in Indigenous communities across Turtle Island, and often in response to injustice, which is ongoing and felt at so many different registers and scales, but also due to the climate crisis as well. So I gesture towards this ongoing work in different ways through considerations of repatriation of ancestral and cultural belongings, by reckoning with history in the present moment, and honoring Indigenous art and dance histories. And I do this through liveness, in open rehearsals with dancers prior to the pandemic, no longer at this point, with dancers and composers in the museum, in performance, in consideration of the bodies of sculptures and ancestral and cultural belongings, and through an approach that centers conversation and visiting, by building a small community as we work alongside one another on projects, by listening and making works for camera. So I also consider that there's collective work and collective action towards justice as Indigenous peoples. And while my work is not the thing itself, meaning that I can't do the cultural, political, or social work for our peoples, because it cannot stand in for grassroots organizing, for families learning their Indigenous languages, or intergenerational teachings of old style fancy shawl or old style jingle dress dances, which my daughters both dance. I'm suggesting that it can't do that, but it does something in the world. It does something. And the reason that I say that it can't do that is because these dances, languages, and other structures in law, education, health, our spiritual life, and more kept us for multiple millennia. They were a set of organizing forces that protected us. So that brings me to Indigenous geometries. I'm going to show an excerpt. I'll just do that now. I'm thinking about the time. I'm very mindful of the time. So I hope this works well.
You have time. It's good. Don't rush.
The reason I like to start there, even before I've sort of described the project, is because there's something so beautiful and powerful about Laura Ortman's violin, and also this embodied, this dance by Kainwan Gobert and now Ivani Abanmalo. So I just want to say that this work, Indigenous Geometries, came about because a group of Indigenous architects in fall of 2018 asked how I might envision a space for Indigenous performance. And I'm not often asked how I might imagine a space outside of domination. This question is rooted in potentiality towards freedom, towards imagining physical space, but also other conceptual structures that come to be materialized. The proposition to make a space that responds to the body, to sound, to one another, a way of being in relation rather than constraining the body to fit within the museum structures. So I carried this question with me into the Chicago Architecture Biennial, inviting Tiffany Collinge into a series of generative conversations as we developed a work in response to this question, and I undertook a performance led by this question as well. So there are many citations for such a project, and I often begin by thinking about the place and what relation I may have to that place. In this instance, in my early conversations with co-curator Sapaki Angiama, I introduced her to work by Indigenous poets Joy Harjo and Susie Sillock in relation to Chicago. And Joy Harjo is now in her third year of holding the sort of, now it's escaping me the title, but she's the poet of the United States, which is quite incredible. Included in the catalog is Adventures in Chinatown, 1958 by Susie Sillock. It tells the story of her family's relocation from a remote Alaskan village to Chinatown in Chicago during the federal relocation program. The US government moved Indigenous peoples from their homelands to cities across the US, promising education and employment, but often they found poverty. The government tried to disperse the people to discourage community building, but many people maintained relationships, including with their homelands. And cities such as Chicago, Denver, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, Indigenous peoples found one another and made urban Indigenous communities. And this is evidenced partly in the vibrant American Indian Center of Chicago. And there are now generations of Indigenous people who live in cities, and they also organized politically in the 1960s. In the fall of 2018, I was also reading a series of short texts written by faculty and students at the Institute of American Indian Arts in 1969, which is also a tribal college in the United States. And their theorization of American Indian theater's structure, space, the clothing that should be worn, the feeling that should come about. And I also cite Alutiiq material culture and architecture, which evoke Alutiiq aesthetics, materials, technologies, and views of the universe in the work. So as I said, I've known Tiffany since 2015, and we have these shared networks of relations, places, and activities, which helped our conversation about architecture and its relationship to Indigenous peoples. We discussed the ways in which architecture is abstract, that it can provide a way to orient oneself to Indigenous languages and to Indigenous histories, an idea shared with her by Anishinaabe elder Jim O'Cheese, that architecture is not necessarily about finding a location, but finding our Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And this made sense to me as I've spent time within Indigenous architectural spaces, lodges, and teepees that are embedded with Indigenous knowledge, that hold within their very structures, teachings, and laws. Indigenous architecture is also provisional, temporary, mobile, and the materiality is at the scale of the body, whether human or more than human. So we discussed the ways in which our culture spatializes, is ephemeral and layered. So these assemblies are fitted together to create a dome-like shape and can move separately on their own to create other geometries and relationships. In this manner, the work itself can have several iterations for performance and alludes to the assembly of cultural practices. And I'm going to leave time at the end, hopefully for Tiffany to also speak to this. So you have just seen an excerpt of a song of felt structure, We're Putting Ourselves Back Together Again, which took place in December 2019. And what you didn't see was that in the first section, the dancers moved the flat bar bentwood pieces into different relationships, which speaks to the ways in which Alutiiq and more broadly Indigenous structures of governance, education, health, and familial structures have been actively dismantled by US and Canadian policies, and the ways in which Indigenous peoples continue to work towards putting their languages, families, and themselves back together again through ongoing imperial and colonial disruptions. So they also embodied the idea that our objects have their own energetic qualities and that they listen, so that there is care required in our handling of them, in our voices and sounds generated near them, as the wood comes to hold these sounds like memories of our conversations, the sounds of our breath, of laughter, the violin. So I'm now going to move on, although it is 5:30, so I'm mindful, and unfortunately I can't see anything because I clicked off of of that. So Shauna, I don't know, I can skip the last project if that would be more appropriate, just given our time constraints.
I think I feel like we need to see the last project, and then we'll get to Tiffany and open it up for discussion.
Okay, sounds great.
I'm pretty sure everybody's right here with you. So
okay,
going.
I always want to know if people are with me, if it's okay.
We're here. We're so here with you.
Okay, great. So this speaks to this work for camera that you can see on the screen through indigenous geometries. And this is the work for camera that I'm going to speak to briefly. It's called This Moment, an Endurance to the End Forever. And it came about during the early moments and days of my limited mobility due to the worldwide pandemic. And I began to consider breath, atmospheres, and clouds, and also the live news coverage of George Floyd's murder, the response in Black Lives Matter, as well as ongoing indigenous resistance to state violence, including in relation to the climate crisis, which Kristen Simmons says is significant as she speaks about settler atmospherics and their role in anti-Black and anti-Indigenous violence. She says, the conditions we breathe in are collectively and unequally distributed with particular qualities and intensities that are felt differently through and across time, which felt very urgent for me. And so I began to consider indigenous knowledges that teach us about breath, air, and I shot this work for camera, This Moment, an Endurance to the End Forever. The first part, which you don't see, was shot on Super 8 in my living room near two of what I call the sculptural spines from indigenous geometries. And I considered this a potential counter to the US and Canadian federal policies that have, as I said, worked to dismantle our homes and families through things like the Indian residential schools systems. And I wanted to make it more explicit, this connection to my home specifically. And in the second part of the work, you're seeing stills from this more than human structure. So I'm working with the dancers Ivani Abenmalo and Kainwan Gobert. And we were thinking about, or I was proposing, the density of the atmosphere that surrounds the Earth and holds us close to the planet by gravity that then dissipates in all directions forever outward toward and through the cosmos. So we investigated the textures, tones, and other qualities of breath and atmospheres through embodiment. And this was balanced with structuring the video through what I proposed to be the duration of one day from sunrise to sunset. And I'm also citing ritual time as expressed in the text that I mentioned earlier from 1969. So I think what I'll do is, rather than read the text that I wrote that lives within the work for camera, I'll show you one excerpt. So Tiffany, I'm just wondering if there were any comments that you had about indigenous geometries that you wanted to share, if there were things, I mean, there was lots that I missed, but I just wanted to provide a bit of an overview.
That was pretty good. I'll just share a couple extra additional things just to in the spans of time. So one of the things that, you know, the beautiful context in which Tanya talked about this work is the theoretical sort of overview, but what you don't really see is the text that she supplies to all of us when working with Tanya. She sort of is very thoughtful in the process and the care, which I also really carry with her. And so those dancers, for example, were responding to texts that she gave them before the performance as well, for example. And before we began our conversations, she sent me texts as well to sort of set the stage of where she was coming from. So I would say that this work is not just about the final product. And I would say that for all of the work that you saw Tanya was doing as well, is that there's a lot put into the process to get to that. So it must be frustrating for you just to show one image and not be able to say all of the amazing things that happens in that moment. But what was really remarkable about that time when we came together in December 2019 was that it was mostly a space for family as well. One of the dancers had brought her mother, and Tanya's daughter was there, and my children were there. And so it was really around community. And so this is Jasper touching these objects, and this is around us discussing. But then there's just also about the detailing of mobility. I think this was really important, that this wasn't a static object. I was just editing some text early this morning about an exhibition that this will be in. It's not a sculpture in my mind. I don't know if Tanya agrees, but it's a piece of architecture. It's creating a space. And so I think it's not also just about the end result of how it looks, but it's how the curatorial prep team comes and prepares the space. There's lots of abstract qualities around it, and this is just a beginning relationship that we have where we'll continue this to move forward. So it's been a bit interrupted, but for good reason, but this work will continue. That was beautiful, Tanya. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. Yeah, I can hear me. I think you can all hear me too. So I kind of don't have any words. I'm so moved by all this beautiful work that you've shared, our panelists have shared today, Latai, Amanda, Shannon, Joe, Tiffany, Tanya. So thank you for being here and creating these openings to think, make, be together differently moving forward. So what I would love to do is open it up for questions from our attendees here that are online. I'm going to follow a chat if you want to chat, but also if you just want to pop in, and we can be really fluid about it, and I'll look for virtual hands. So I hand it over to our other guests who have been here listening.
I'm going to start off just to say thank you so much. I love the way that there was practice, there was theory, there was interweavings, there was separate threads. It was really fantastic, and a lot of food for thought there. So thank you for that. And I thought it was very interesting too, this notion, I guess, just going back to this notion of ground that we started with Latai's, you know, like the ground, the rising waters and the fluid ground of the Pacific, and ended with her ground, which was this kind of very, you know, the violent ground of the glass and grinding the glass back into sand, you know, which is a very powerful work that Latai has been performing in various iterations over the years. And then ending up with this sort of the ramping amphitheatre, which I thought was really lovely too, with the different materials and the stones, and then ending up with this beautiful timber teepee, you know, that which is in itself a sort of an act of assemblage on so many different levels, you know. So I just want to thank you, really. I mean, there's so much. I've taken so many notes, but it was just so rich and inspiring. And it's probably worth mentioning as well to all of you that this really is the beginning of a future publication project that we're interested in as well. So, you know, I can't wait to see if these, you know, that what we saw today can also be part of the publication, but also to think about what you might also want to offer. So thank you so much, guys. Fantastic.
I don't know, Andrew, if you want to say something. I was seeing a lot of nodding heads among our guest speakers today while the others were presenting. So I'm kind of curious about what that nodding head and that smiling is, or that kind of connecting is about, or if you have, you know, I mean, you're connected now too, right? So if you weren't before. So I was seeing a lot of an affirming through your responses on the screen. Oh, and I do have Anna Birch has a hand up. Anna.
I just was silenced really by the amazingness of it, and just building on what Dorita said, the different textures just come over so palpably, and the possibilities for performance. I think the way that it ran through, one offering built on the next, and we had this opportunity to participate with the sticks and with the rhythm. But I think that was just a taste of what was being offered by the selection of work that we were privileged to witness today. So I just wanted to say that, really. But there's something about the textures that Dorita picked up as well, about the glass, and then the different architectural kind of surfaces and spaces that came out very clearly out of this curated panel. So thank you.
The nodding heads, Shona, that you refer to, there's just nothing more wonderful than sitting in a space where you feel so culturally safe and so sort of cradled in the ancestral knowledges and our elders, in our stories, and just listening to everybody speak and seeing your amazing, beautiful work. It's so inspiring. It's so rejuvenating, so fulfilling. It's just, yeah, it's been really, really wonderful start to our day, especially that start to, I just want collaborations. And Latai, we are very close to you, so maybe we need to start there. Love all the work we've seen. It's just so inspiring. It's just really.
As a space to share your work, it's very rare that things resonate so beautifully. Like when we're out in the world doing this, we're constantly encountering cultural violence in ways that can make it exhausting and make you wonder whether you want to keep going sometimes. And so to sit and just be in a space where none of that exists, and there are shared stories, narratives, and kind of struggles, as well as like celebrations.
And you can jump straight to the deep stuff. We don't have to start with, you know, indigenous aspects of life 101 kind of thing. It's like, it's just beautiful. All the work that I've seen is so inspiring. Just, yeah, it's been a lovely, lovely safe space. I just can't wait to see if there's a future for all the works. Like, how can we collaborate? What can we do across the oceans and the miles? And
imagine the conversations if it wasn't a 12-minute presentation that we could have. So let's all be in space and time together one day.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this was a master class for me also, because as someone who doesn't work in the field of architecture, but certainly thinks about space and time in choreography and the body, like those are the three kind of main, elements of any time I'm making work, I'm thinking about those. And so to hear some of the architectural perspectives, even just to hear Tiffany share a little bit more about her practice broadly. You know, we live across the country from each other, so we don't get to see one another very often, but also to hear these beautiful contributions across the ocean. You know, it's just really remarkable. I feel as though not only are we incredibly privileged, but also I think everyone here to have that opportunity to listen in on this important work that's happening. I'm so grateful to be here today.
And I want to tautoko support that too, and also you know, recognize and give thanks to this very sensitive provocation around the idea of performing grounds. You know, and what's interesting about that is it does establish this common ground that we can all work on and speak to. And for me, it's powerful because I think we are, as a global culture, now having to engage in a kind of geologizing of our culture. You know, we if we are to survive as a civilization, we will be changing the way our urban cultures live, you know. And so it's quite a remarkable moment in time that we're at, that we may be able to really start to shift the ontological base of our culture, which would be amazing if our architecture and our cities and the way we perform our everyday lives is really driven by an understanding of our deep connection with this living earth, you know, with our more than human kin. So it feels like a very amazing moment. It's a really nice time to be running this too while COP26 is on, you know, the climate change conference. Yeah, so very auspicious and interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone. I think that the point that Tiffany raised about integration and the way you spoke very eloquently, not only about integration of kind of the past, but also the integration with family. And that seemed a logic that seemed to be very strongly felt and powerfully kind of woven through everyone's discussions. And I think partly we're kind of dealing with the silence as well, is that to ask a question within that feels like to start to break apart that integrated quality and go into particularities, where it seemed like I think particularly Shannon and Joe, the image of the casuarina leaves gathering in the inscription on the surface, that is resonating powerfully with me too, partly because that's, you know, I was born in Sydney and now living, you know, on the other side of the world as well, so it kind of takes me back to that childhood sense of that. But I think that integrative logic, and it feels like the sort of work you've been presenting is very necessary, and time is finding its time as well, very strongly, like that kind of sense of, you spoke a little bit, Shannon and Joe, about the margins, you know, architecture being haunted by the occupants of the margins, and that the kinds of knowledges that you embody and perform are being recentered. I mean, through what we face as a kind of global, as a global challenge now. So thank you. I've taken lots of notes and I'm just processing. So it's fantastic to hear all your work.
Thank you, Andrew. Sorry, go ahead, Shannon. And there's a hand I have to. Go ahead.
I just think, you know, that mornings like this and these times together just remind me and reinforce my cultural fortitude to say, we're here, we survived, everybody, like, this is amazing. You know, they didn't win and they haven't won and they're not going to win. And this is everything.
And I think our approach to the margins is informed by the idea that Bell Hooks shared of the margins as a site of resistance, and Shona, and that idea that centering isn't necessary. It's about being in strength in the place where you are, and so that would be approach to that.
Yeah. I see a hand here from Angret.
Yes, hi. So this is a pretty open question to the speakers. So I'm seeing something about a relationship. There's like something about a kind of return to spatial ancestry that seems to run across everybody's work. And what I'm asking about and what I'm wondering is how might we, as we're returning to our built spaces of performance and our educational spaces of performance, how can we return to those spaces with the same kind of sensitivity towards change and connection? And how might you like to see your work taken up as we all move forward? And really, anybody, like any impulse or reactions to that, really quite open. I'm a teacher. I'm thinking about, how now that we're back in the classroom, how are we taking up these new spaces for students to feel a sense of place? So I really think it can be applicable on many, many levels.
I guess I could just speak to that briefly, just in terms of our new architecture school that we're setting up. We're in the second year of starting up this new pedagogy, really, which is informed by Indigenous knowledge and by ecological thinking. And the first year of the degree is focused on whakapapa, or, understanding that the earth is a living agent, a being, trying to understand how to design sensitively in response to that ancestral ground, trying to understand the mana whenua, the local people's approach to land. And then the year two is focused on Mauri ora, understanding that everything that we do, the way we live and perform in the world, has local global effects, and trying to engage with this living world in a way that's ethical and brings Mauri ora, brings well-being, rather than brings the current state of ecological decline. So it's very new. It's we're building the wings of the architecture plane as we're flying, but already the student response is really coherent. They really understand the focus. They are loving learning more about Indigenous knowledge, and we've got many Indigenous and students, a number of Indigenous students, and they love also learning about ecology and ecological thinking, and how to have a more holistic way of thinking about architecture and urbanism. Dorita's been wonderful in contributing to that program as well. So you could perhaps speak to that a little bit, perhaps, Dorita. Did you want to comment on that school and how it's trying to land an understanding of a living earth?
Absolutely. I mean, I have to say that, I feel very excited and privileged to be part of this kind of, to be involved and contribute to, but mainly to learn from, and even in, from this course, it's just been completely enriching. And I don't think this particular panel would have happened without that engagement, because it's, and it's so great that the students are starting off by thinking about this notion of whakapapa, that we are all interconnected, and, that kind of enmeshed reality and relationship to place and land. And it's then getting us to really think. I've been thinking a lot recently about what Catherine Ingraham calls the burdens of linearity in architecture, that when we draw a line, that's the ground, and we still draw that line. And, we still have to keep reminding the students that the ground is not a line, that the ground extends in many ways and is a kind of an extensive living entity, as you said. So I think that's pretty exciting. And also, you know, I think your Māori Ora compass is very exciting and interesting and complex, and hard for us to be able to wrap our heads around it now, but to know it's there, you know, makes me want to know more about it. But there was another thing that I wanted to say too about that is, as well, you know, the council in Auckland has established, which I think the Māori Ora compass, it really is a development of this notion of the Tiaranga design principle. So even in Auckland now, you know, and I won't teach an urban design project to the students without, you know, introducing them to the Tiaranga design principles. Without now, to think about urban design, you do have to think about these kind of very fundamental principles of community, of guardianship, of hospitality, you know, and that for me has just been very enriching, because even from my cultural background, which is from Lebanon, you know, those they resonate with me culturally too, from another culture that, you know, hasn't had any room or place for expression in Aotearoa New Zealand. So yeah, so I think that's probably another great thing, is that in finally having this moment, and I think it's a moment that's been coming a long time, and I liked what was it Tanya said about imagining a space outside, you know, that having a moment where you can imagine a space outside of domination, you know, and so on one hand you've got this kind of, you know, this impending catastrophe where the world is, you know, in extreme danger and the urgency of that, but then this other idea of kind of being able to engage with these principles that mean so much to us, you know, that can resonate and give us the opportunity from other cultures as well to engage with what space and place can be outside of, you know, the burdens of linearity and the domination of empire. So I'm incredibly grateful for that reason.
I just wanted to say, I really so much resonated with me in these talks. Amanda's Māori Ora compass really spoke to me a lot, and actually reminded me of the Darawal calendar that I've seen. And you know, as a person from the Moana, I'm one of the youngest civilizations living in one of the oldest civilizations, and so making work is about also looking at the whakapapa and the genealogy of materials, and that relationship to the body, and how it can speak to the precariousness of our relationship in general with the natural world now. And I'm actually, you know, I've been up all night for the last few nights because of COP26, and so I'm just kind of all over the place. But I really, you know, for me, it is one of those things of trying to make work that is in service, that is not continuing the extraction culture and, you know, practice that we know so well. And in performance, you know, in the theatre, it's one of the most wasteful places, you know. And also, given the urgency, I really like the idea of just working with materials that already exist and letting the story of those materials also frame the ideas of what, you know, what I'm trying to say. And so, yeah, there's so many ways now that we can use our ancient knowledge to tell very contemporary stories and issues that are so relevant now. And in a way, I think it's about that performing country and that responsibility and accountability to place. So yeah, ideas of utilizing the most incredible natural environment to frame the work, the performance, the performativity of embodying the ideas and minimizing sometimes what we have to use is what's been really interesting for me, and also trying to work out how to do those things in lockdown because you can't access a whole lot of material. So there've been some really interesting challenges, but I think working in emergency management of late has really made me think about how to work with less, but just like pardon me, just like all the codes of our ancient cultures, they hold so much. So these are the types of things I'm really interested in continuing using whatever's around, like the waste materials, like all those glass bottles, they're from a uptown bar, and it was an incredible amount of top shelf liquor from 2 weeks that I collected, and it really blew me away. It's almost another work in itself to calculate the cost of that. And then also that glass then was taken to be used as aggregate for construction. So just trying to work out how to construct an environment that holds the idea and then it be useful in another way is something that to go back to Angret's comment, is the thing that is of interest to me, is how to do that. Just like our ancestors did, using the beautiful materials that they had available to them.
Thank you.
Yeah, one thing I would just say though is that it's not just like a return to it. I think it's an extension of that cultural landscape. It's not that we're returning. I think we're just continuing the story. And especially for students, I think they almost feel like they're working within a vacuum, I think sometimes, but they're not actually alone. Like they have their ancestors speaking to them, whether they're listening or not. There's stories within their own family that they can bring about. And I think it's really difficult when students are thinking about indigenous discussions because they feel like they're separate from, but they forget that they have their own past, their own histories to bring to the story, and to meet up with, that they're not being left behind and that they're not in a different location. We're in the safe space together. And so I think that's one thing that I noticed is happening in these classrooms, is this difficulty around the language. And I think maybe some people are returning, but I think for some people it's a continuous thread. It's like a circle.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tiffany.
I have to be the timekeeper because we are at 6 o'clock. We were scheduled to, or 6 o'clock here in Tiohtià, Montreal. So I'm wondering, I feel like this is to be continued. This is that we continue, as Tiffany just implied. So maybe this is, I'm happy to wrap this up now. I think we have to, but I feel like this is the beginning of new connections, interconnectedness, relationships. And I'm very, very excited for us to see where we can go from here and how we can stay connected. And I know that, for Dorita, and not to speak for Dorita and Andrew, but we will carry this forward and be in touch and keep this going with all of your energy and your input. So
thank you so much. I'm deeply grateful for this opportunity, but I can only imagine who else is in the room in this conversation. And so I'm deeply grateful for this time, but I also want to acknowledge the people that are in the room and what they were bringing to this conversation too. I could really feel something here, and I really appreciate that time and space. Thank you so much.
Yes, I want to tautoko that too, support that. It's so lovely to see, so many people in the room who are, very dear colleagues and old friends, but also new people. And so it's times like these in this age of, various lockdowns, because Auckland's in lockdown at the moment, and, these kind of across zones, to have this wonderful connection with people, which is, as Amanda suggested, is an enmeshed connection across these, extraordinary planet that we're living in. So thank you, everybody. Thank you particularly to the speakers, but thank you to everyone who's participated by just being here.
Thank you.
We did record this. So sorry, Anna. Yeah, we did record this, and I'll make sure there's a copy that we can share.
Thanks, Shona. That's actually what I was just gonna say. So I hate to be the person busting in at to end things, but it is part of my task. So thank you again so much for being virtually here with us in Fourth Space, and Shona and the students or other folks who have joined us in on site here. Thanks for being here. All the audience members on Zoom as well. Thanks for all your comments and participation. And as Shona rightly said, we have a recording, so we'll decide what happens with it, but it might make its way in various places and spaces, so we'll be in touch with that. Okay, folks, I am going to close up the Zoom. Have a great day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. Take good care.
Nice to meet you all.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.